listening to Wisp Sports Radio's Locker Room Talk. We're women. We talk about sport. Get over it.
Hello and welcome to our brand new Wisp radio show, Locker Room Talk. I'm Sara Gross. I'm an almost retired pro triathlete from Victoria, Canada, and I am also a writer, producer, and presenter for Wisp Sports. And I'm here with Kelly O'Mara, sports reporter and journalist from San Francisco, and also a pretty solid triathlete herself. You're going pro this year, aren't you, Kelly?
Right, you say I'm almost a pro triathlete, and you're almost not anymore, right?
Yeah, we're crossing
in the night.
So the show is called Locker Room Talk, and we're women, and we're talking about sport, and that's how it is. So coming up on the show, Kelly and I talk about the U.S. presidential election, how the outcome relates to sport, why we need more women talking about sport, plus some great news stories from surfing, running, and our own lives. I can't seem to start any conversation lately without talking about the U.S. presidential election.
What? You mean it's dominating news? That's shocking information.
Right? All the latest here on our podcast. I think I've got over the initial sort of shock and depression and grappling with understanding of how Trump was considered electable. And now I'm sort of thinking more towards why people feel let down by their country's leaders, who is being left behind by the process of globalization, and how does all this knowledge change the way we talk about sport?
You got to bring it back to sports. I wasn't shocked because there's like a certain portion of the country that's always going to vote Republican, a certain portion that's always going to vote Democrat, and everything else is in the middle, right? Where I'm at now is I'm like, okay, if everybody's trying to understand the other portion of the country, but we're at a point where we are no longer believing information or people's experiences that we don't see firsthand, then the only way anyone ever is going to listen to anyone else is pop culture and sports. If people don't believe newspapers anymore, which is growing to be true, and people don't believe other people's stories, then the only thing that will make a difference, like that changes, that gets stories out there and changes people's minds and all that, is TV and sports, and because that's the only way that people from those completely different ends of the country will ever talk to each other, or know each other, or see each other.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about that. For me, it was more that Trump being elected underlined the need to sort of continue to try to make change and to understand people's differences, to listen, to create opportunities for underrepresented groups. And of course, sport is such a male-dominated part of society.
Unlike politics, for example. Right.
Right. Point taken. I guess it's no coincidence that we called the show Locker Room Talk, because Trump supporters called some of his misogynist comments, if you will, just locker room talk, and that was their way of dismissing it.
Which, I think is a strange concept, obviously, because that got really hung up on the words he was using, as if using the word pussy is what is offensive, right? That's not what is offensive. You can use whatever language you want. If you're like, yeah, then I'm going to respect the shit out of her pussy, I'd be like, cool, great. Like, that's awesome. It misunderstood what was offensive, which was the implied actions. That was the first, and by writing it off as talk, you're not understanding what women were upset about, I think. But the other part is weird, is women have locker rooms too. I have been in plenty of women's locker rooms. We talk about plenty of things that are all over the place. So this notion of locker room talk immediately implies male locker room, first off, and secondly implies some kind of space that women are not obviously allowed, but then that their viewpoints are not valid, or their bodies. Yeah.
Right. And you also see that it's a way of, when men behave badly, it's a way of kind of deflating the reaction around it to say, oh, but it's just locker room talk, so that's somehow okay, which it's completely not. And misogyny should have no place in our world, as far as I'm concerned.
Noted.
And case in point with this is the way the Harvard men's soccer team had some kind of written document describing incoming female players.
Scouting report. So the idea was that every year the freshman boys would write up a scouting report on the incoming freshman girls and how attractive, how likely they were to have sex with you. And on the one hand, you're like, oh, like whatever, like everyone talks about everybody. It's not a big deal. I'm like, I've been in girls' locker rooms where we're like, oh yeah, he's really hot. He's not as hot. Whatever. But they literally wrote up a document that gave each of the girls, like named them, assigned them a value from 1 to 10, gave them a name that was based on a sex position, and had things like, well, she looks like she'd really like missionary, but I bet she'd take it another way. Or, well, she's both the hottest and has the most STDs. Or like, well, her teeth are too big, so I had to downgrade her to a 5. You know, like, and you can be like, oh, that seems abstract, but think about it, these are actual girls whose names are listed. And what's more is that they found out about that, like, you know, this came to light as these players were seniors, but this is done every year or had been done every year. It's a tradition. So these people had actually been friends, like the girls had thought that these guys were their friends, and like maybe they were, maybe they changed their minds, maybe whatever. And then they find out that like, oh, actually, you think this about me and you said this about me. You clearly did not put yourself in those girls' shoes and think about them as people.
Yeah, and you know, I've been in a lot of women's locker rooms and I've been in a lot of women's sporting environments, and I've never written down a document.
Right. I can't imagine that happening.
Right. So we definitely have a massive gendered kind of discrepancy there, right? Where documenting that kind of thing somehow was okay. But now, well, actually, it's come to light.
Soccer team apologized. I think they even got disbanded. And then what was interesting was the men's cross country team came forward, even without it having been discovered, and was like, actually, you know, we did this too, but we like have stopped it and we feel really bad and we want to come clean, which I thought was really interesting. You're like, okay, progress, baby steps, small steps.
So here we are in our new locker room, and hopefully we don't behave that badly. Each week, we're going to discuss global issues in sport and some shocking stories. And we're going to interview some women who are major influencers in sport. So should be a pretty cool podcast coming up.
I don't think we're necessarily going to talk about just women's sports every week. I think we're going to talk about sports and news in sports. But guess what? Like with a women's perspective, because there isn't any of that really much at all. And so I think that's valuable.
Okay, here's a question for you. How do we change the culture of sport? And how do we create a more respectful dialogue in 20 words or less?
Well, it's harder to hate people that you know, right? Like this is always true. So the only real way to ever like change people's minds or change hatred, etc., is to like know more people. And it's not going to always be true, but it's not like necessary, but it is, or it's not sufficient, but it is necessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And what do you see the show being about specifically as we move forward? What kind of topics will we cover?
Like we just said, like I think like news in the sports world that isn't being covered, I don't think we're particularly going to talk about game stats. I don't think we're going to talk about, you know, how many touchdowns this receiver got, whatever. I totally don't even think that was a real thing I just said because I don't care about football.
But we know what you meant.
Yes. But I think we're going to talk more about general, larger issues as they pertain to, you know, news that is happening, what is happening, what is not being covered, what is not being talked about, that kind of thing.
And to start off, there's a topic that you covered recently in a feature article on Wisp Sports about the Maverick surfing competition in San Francisco there. And this year, they've only just started to allow women and had a women's heat. Why did it take them so long?
Well, I think what was really interesting so Mavericks is historic, Mavericks is famous, there's been movies about it, and it's very, very manly, right? Because people die. It's a test of manhood. And what is interesting about the allowing women this year is that they never weren't allowed. It was always just, oh, a woman, if she was good enough, we'd pick her, which is weird because like if you only ever picked the best runners on pure time, women wouldn't get picked. Like that's why we have women's category. So that's a little weird. There's a whole issue there. But secondly, it's the whole question of gatekeepers, right? Like this committee selecting them was men. They had like a set of criteria, but the criteria are relatively subjective. So who gets to decide that these women aren't good enough? Who is saying, and it's not like, and to be very clear, because a lot of people misunderstand this, they thought no women had ever surfed there. Women have surfed there lots of times. Women surf there regularly. They just weren't being invited to the contest. So women are, like, people are like, oh, it's not safe. Oh, women are going to die. We can't which that's a whole nother like weird paternalistic level. So like if women wanted to do stuff that's unsafe, like why don't we let them? But there are women who are big wave surfers who are very good, who are like, we're good enough, give us our own heat. And Mavericks always hadn't, because they said the focus was on the men, that if the women were good enough, they would be allowed in that main heat. And basically the state government said wouldn't give them a permit unless they allowed women in, which is also really interesting because I don't know how, like, I don't think it would have happened if the state hadn't said that. Pretty clear it wouldn't have, because they weren't going to do it until the state said, we're not going to give you your permit. So, I mean, do we have to tell people they have to let women in and then eventually they'll like get on board once they see the women are good? I don't know.
It often goes that way, though, doesn't it? I mean, Title IX being case in point. I'm involved in a similar situation where we asked a local council to try to help us get more women in an event, and they turned us down because they told us it wasn't the place of the local council. So is that an issue there?
Yeah, I mean, that was a bit like when the commission voted, there were certainly people who voted, commissioners who voted against this move, saying like it's not the place of the commission. But the Coastal Commission, which is the government body, its mission is to provide equal access to all. So their argument was that if you're giving a permit that's like an exclusive permit, and it doesn't provide equal access, then that doesn't even allow the possibility for a women's event to come about on its own. Does that make sense? So then it's pretty discriminatory. There's some precedent for that. They also told in the past, there was like a private beach club that didn't allow or didn't have any like minority members. And they told them like, yeah, come on, pull it together, guys, or we're going to take your permit back. And I think it's actually had a big impact because this whole debate's been going on for a year. And all of a sudden, the World Surf League, which is kind of the, it's not actually the governing body of surfing, but it's like the biggest tour. In this past year, as this debate's been happening, they announced their own like women's big wave tour for the first time. And the first event happened this past weekend. And, you know, they'd like, it was, and this is the first, like, that was the first time. And like the women did really good. And it was like really cool. And like, maybe it won't be successful. I don't know. But the whole debate definitely helped contribute to that happening. Surfing has a lot of its own issues, though. Yeah.
It's a good start. We should probably talk about the New York City Marathon, which was on November 6th. And you and I have talked about this before, how big city marathons have found a way to get good coverage for the elite women athletes and also to stop interference of their race with the men's race.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the last like 40 minutes or something of New York. And the way they do it is interesting. And I think all the big city marathons do this. They start the women first and then the men. And I had always been like, oh, wow, that's so open-minded. Like, that's so like surprisingly egalitarian. Right. And then I realized as I was watching it, because I was watching it live on TV, I realized they do it so that the finishers finish within like 10 minutes of each other. So it makes good TV. So you can like wrap up your coverage instead of sitting around. Like triathlon, you're always like sitting around another half hour, like waiting for the first woman. And then like the women don't get as much coverage because they're like, and now we have to go. And it's like super weird. So it's one of those times where like, not only did it like make good commercial sense, but it also like provided more TV time for the women, like covered the race more, all that, and gave them a clean race. So they weren't like running into the back of like a lot of men that are slower, even though the men do run into the back of the women some, but it's like way fewer. So it's not really a problem.
Yeah, it's a fantastic solution. And here's a story that I thought was mildly amusing. The outcome of the US election could affect LA's bid for the 24 Olympic Games. I kind of had this image in my mind of the private group organizing the bid going and like, we're really sorry, but it's still going to work out. Come to LA.
I don't think a lot of foreign governments were super pro-Trump, is my sense.
Just a sense you have, yeah.
I think given that it's LA and it's California, and California went even like further left at the same time the rest of the country went right, they're probably trying to sell that. They're like, hey, we're great, we promise. Like,
it'll be interesting to see, actually, if the Trump presidency does affect that bid.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be clear, my understanding is like the International Olympic Committee was not big fans of Obama. They thought he was like kind of condescending and patronizing, and they had that whole like America thinks it's better than everybody thing. Like that's why Chicago kind of didn't get it as much. This is not like this whole like US as insular thing is not new, right? So I don't know. Let's see we'll see.
And there's been a lot of chatter online in the last few weeks that I've seen about a Runner's World article called Running While Female. A lot of discussion about women being harassed while running. Have you been harassed while running?
I live in San Francisco Bay Area, so like not as much.
The men of San Francisco Bay don't harass women?
No, they do. It's just like slightly like, it's like, you know what I'm saying? You don't get like catcalling as much. It does happen. You get a lot, or I get, given that I'm small, I get a lot of explaining why I shouldn't be doing this.
Oh!
Yes. I get, especially bike riding, not as much running. Guys are always, they're always giving me tips. They're like, you should be riding a higher cadence. The fuck? Like, okay. You shouldn't be going this hard. Are you sure you should be out here by yourself? It's probably not safe. And like, are you sure this is healthy? Like, I get all that, which I always am like, that's weirder.
It's always these situations where you recognize, and I'm starting to become more aware of this, that if you were male, they wouldn't be saying what they're saying.
Oh, I've ridden with my husband, and he was like a pro level cyclist, and he's really good. And we were riding one day, and he was riding the mountain bike, and I was riding like my regular bike, so that he could go slower with me.
So you could stay together. Yeah.
Right. And this guy on like whatever, like went sprinting past us and then like slowed down to stop. And like, because that's what guys do whenever, guys do that to me all the time on my bike. They always like sprint past me to be like, oh, I'm better. And then they stop. And my husband was like, oh, that's so weird. Like, I've never seen that happen. That happens all the time. And he was like, no, usually people just respect me and don't try and race me. Well,
exactly. I was in the pool the other day, and another pro triathlete told my friend and I that we shouldn't be swimming so hard because we were swimming faster than him. And we shouldn't be swimming so hard because aren't we in our off season?
And you're like, cool, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I've had a lot of men explaining triathlon to me lately. Obviously, I don't know anything about triathlon, clearly. So that's been awesome.
Yeah, I picked out a quote from the article Men Explain Things to Me. A classic, which I had never seen, and thank you for sharing it with me. And my favorite quote was...
Which is a classic, by the way. I was surprised you'd never read it.
She says, I hasten to add that the essay makes it clear mansplaining is not a universal flaw of the gender, just the intersection between overconfidence and cluelessness, where some portion of that gender gets stuck. And I think that's so true. I like the cluelessness piece because often when we talk about these things, the men around us will react and say, well, no, I respect women. It's that unconscious level of not really knowing. I don't know how we change that, but I do know that sitting around and talking about it is a good start.
Yeah, and I think like that Runner's World story, it literally just went through and documented, like surveyed women and like how often do you get harassed or how often do people yell? And I think for a lot of guys, it was like they knew it happened, but they didn't know it happened that frequently. And like even right now, I'm like, oh, it doesn't happen to me that much, but of course, like it happened like yes, right? It happens all the time. We just don't really even think about it, and so it doesn't get. And so just making this information available is actually valuable.
Exactly. And so Kelly and I are going to be talking about this kind of stuff every other week on this podcast, Locker Room Talk. And that concludes our first episode. If you want more women's sports coverage or want to help spread the word that female athletes deserve more coverage and better coverage, follow @Wisp Sports on Twitter or Facebook. And don't forget to comment, like, and share. Visit wispsports.com for more global women's sports coverage because nobody covers women's sports like we do. Join myself, Sarah Gross,
and Kelly O'Mara
in 2 weeks' time on November 30th for the next episode of Locker Room Talk.